no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. At least when they're wearing a uniform, you can take them out. These people don't have uniforms. But we are under invasion from within. We're stopping it very quickly. After spending trillions of dollars defending the borders of foreign countries, with your help, we're defending the borders of our country from now on.
Of course, it wasn't Alabama. Trump saves his loudest lies for crowds that cheer on cue. This time it was Quantico, a room full of generals who've actually seen war, forced to sit through a man who only plays soldier in his own head. He called it a war from within. Bold words from someone who spent his draft years fighting bone spurs. The irony could have flattened the room. These were men who bled for a flag. He was a man who sells it on t-shirts. And as he spoke, you could feel the silence tightening. Not respect, not awe, just confusion. Because when a president starts calling his own people the enemy, that's not patriotism. That's paranoia in a suit. But what happened after he said the bold words? Let's find out.
With your help, we're defending the borders of our country from now on. We're not going to let this happen. Biden let people come in from prisons, mental institutions, drug dealers, murderers. You know, we had 11,488 murderers allowed into our country by this guy who had no clue. He had no clue. He shouldn't have been there in the first place, but he had no clue. The people that ran the office, the White House, were people that surrounded him, radical left lunatics that are brilliant people, but dumb as hell when it came to policy and common sense. And they allowed people from all over the world, from the Congo. They opened up prisons in the Congo. They came into our country totally unmatched, unvetted, unchecked. And from all over, South America, not just South America. You know, you think South America, no, but from all over. A lot came in from Venezuela. Venezuela emptied its prison population into our country. That's why they have Tren de Aragua, one of the worst gangs ever. But we took care of them. We took good, strong care of them. And I just want to thank the National Guard in Washington, D.C. It's embarrassing to say this. Now I can say it because we solved it. But Washington, D.C. was the most unsafe, most dangerous city in the United States of America. And to a large extent, beyond. And beyond that, you go to Afghanistan, they didn't have anything like that. You go to countries that you would think there's problems.
Donald Trump, who's been telling military top brass in the United States that people are now flocking to join the U.S. military services because he has restored their reputation. It was a meandering speech to generals, admirals, other big figures who flew home at short notice to a very special meeting just outside Washington. Trump also appeared to suggest in his speech that the military had important work to do fighting enemies within the United States. Well, watching me here in the studio, watching that with me in the studio was our international affairs editor, Keravan Gilgestani. Hi, Keravan. Hard to know where to begin. A huge amount covered. Very, very meandering. More so than usual. I don't know if there will be comments about that. And quite difficult to find any thread. You know, these people flew home for this meeting, which was billed as a strategy meeting. What was but noticeable was this a focus here and there on the idea of the military in the US having a lot of work to do in civil disturbances in the inner cities. What did you make of that?
Well, look, let's first start with the format and the fact that hundreds of top military leaders from all around the world were given a few days' notice to fly home, to sit down and listen to the speech that we've just been listening to, which is actually ongoing, so it's nearly 1 hour now. It's really the embodiment of this meeting. Could have been an email that a lot of people who work in offices know about, but it costs millions of dollars to get all of these people into one room. So that's for the sort of format.
No, I think alarmed. I think if you're a serious general officer and you hear that speech, from the President of the United States, when you've all been assembled there in an unprecedented way, suddenly, kind of almost an emergency, canceling all other meetings, travel, so forth. And this is what the president thinks it's appropriate to do, which is to give prepared parts were, mediocre, and not that many of them. Most of it was rambling, repetitious rambling, and goofy and foolish in many cases, and just lie. Insane exaggerations and lies, as he always does. And no, I think you were worried. No, I put Hegseth in this thing too. I think if you come away from it, to say, from my point of view, from the public effect of it, I'm not as alarmed by that outcome as I thought I might be. If you are a serious military officer, I had the exact thought of what you just implied most of the way through the speech, that, geez, three and a third more years of this. And are we going to make it through? And is anyone there telling him, hopefully General Kane, the chairman, is telling him, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. There's been some reporting actually of divisions on the military strategy document that's due soon between all the general staff, and on the one hand, and Hegseth and Trump on the other. But no, maybe you think he's goofy enough. Maybe you reassure yourself by saying that he's goofy enough and distracted enough that he doesn't really cause any, I don't know, that we're not in a nightmare situation. But no, you'd be very worried, I think. Don't you think?
What Trump said earlier today, Congressman, because he was basically calling on these generals to go along with his plans to invade American cities, democratic cities, and sort of take over from a law enforcement standpoint. And he was referring to people as the enemy from within. Let's listen to a little bit of that, and I'll get you to comment and on the other side.
They've done to San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. They're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within. Controlling the physical territory of our border is essential to national security. We can't let these people in.
Yeah, Congressman, to hear the President of the United States talking about places like New York City, that's where your district is, as being part of a war zone that Trump has set his sights on. Your response to that?
It is absolutely preposterous, of course. And I think anybody who's right-thinking knows that. So the question becomes, why is he doing this? Because none of these cities need federal intervention. None of the governors have asked for it. And is there crime in some of these cities? Yes. Frankly, less crime than in a lot of Republican districts and states around the country, if you actually look at the data. But yes, of course, we have to address public safety. But the idea of him using this as a pretext, and it's not even pretextual, he's actually saying that this is the enemy, this is a war. Who's the war with? New York City? Chicago? Los Angeles? Like, what's the war? Is the war Republicans against Democrats? Is that what he's trying to say? And to me, it's of course a distraction from his terrible policies, costs going up, and certainly things like the Epstein files. And don't think for a second that part of the reason the Republicans are not here today is so they could avoid swearing in Adelita Grijalva,
right,
who would be the 218th and final signature on the discharge petition that would force the release of all of the Epstein files documents, not just the ones that Trump is trying to pick and choose that don't include his name or his buddies' names. But it's also, I think, really dangerous because it is trying to manufacture a crisis so that Donald Trump can continue to take more and more authoritarian actions.
The United States of America is facing an emergency tonight. And no, it is not the emergency of the clock ticking to midnight without legislated funding for the American government. We've seen that clock tick to midnight before on nights like this. The emergency the United States of America is facing tonight is an emergency the United States of America has created for the world. And that emergency is that the President of the United States, in his public appearance today, proved that he is mentally incapable and emotionally incapable of fulfilling his constitutional duties as President of the United States. In other words, there is no President of the United States as we knew it. There is no functioning intelligence, no functioning judgment mechanism within the mind of the current holder of the title, President of the United States. And that person is also the holder of the nuclear codes that could destroy the planet in seconds. And he is, much to the horror of the commanding officers of the American military who listened to him today, the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the history of the world. Much of the news media made the mistake of believing that all of the American commanding generals and admirals were being summoned to Quantico, Virginia, to listen to the small man of small experience who is currently the Secretary of Defense. That was obviously a fraudulent reason for demanding that all the generals and admirals fly from all over the world, leaving their command posts, to listen to a speech. It was obviously always just a setup for Donald Trump to harangue that audience with what turned out to be stream of consciousness madness, complete with hallucinations and an endless stream of pathological lies. A group of officers who earned their jobs in ways that Donald Trump never could, had to sit there and listen to a clown who stood before them in what appears to be a homemade brew of orange makeup slathered all over his face because he thinks it makes him look better. And I guess maybe we should accept Donald Trump's judgment about that one thing, that the madman orange makeup he slathers on himself makes him look better. Maybe it does. We don't know. Maybe the actual sight of the actual color of his 79-year-old skin is much worse than the orange clown confection that he chooses, but we don't know. Or maybe the orange junk on his face is yet another proof that the man has no capacity to make a judgment about anything, including the way he looks. Never mind nuclear weapons.
Let me remind you again, when Trump said war from within, it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a window into his worldview. This wasn't about protecting America. It was about controlling it. He sees opposition not as democracy, but as disobedience. And in Trump's universe, disobedience deserves punishment. He has always flirted with militarizing politics, but now he's doing it openly, draping it in patriotism to make it sound noble. What he's really doing is building a narrative where citizens are combatants and loyalty to him equals loyalty to the nation. You could see it in the faces of the officers, that quiet, unspoken disbelief. These are men and women trained to defend the Constitution, not a cult of personality. But Trump thrives on that tension. Every uncomfortable silence is a test of submission. Trump defenders call it tough leadership. But they missed the point entirely. Toughness isn't turning troops on your own people. It's having the moral discipline not to. Critics call it a rehearsal for repression, and they're not wrong. History remembers moments like these, when democracies shrug off early warnings because the rhetoric sounds patriotic. But law and order always sounds noble before it becomes law and honor. Trump isn't trying to unite the country, he's trying to militarize division. And the danger isn't just in his words, it's in how many Americans now cheer them. Every applause for Trump after that Quantico event was an echo of every failed democracy that thought it could never happen here. But it is happening here, in real time, in uniform, under flags that once symbolized freedom. This wasn't a policy speech, it was a threat disguised as leadership. And if Americans don't see it now, they'll see it later, when war from within becomes the excuse for everything done to them in the name of order. Do you really think this is about security, or is it about control? When a president calls his own citizens the enemy, what's left of democracy? Let us know in the comments section. If soldiers start marching in your city tomorrow, would you still call it patriotism?